Last week, I had the opportunity to sit down with David Bedein, a journalist who's produced a shocking documentary exposing a United Nations organization that's helping fund jihad in Palestine against Israel. Have a look.
UNRWA students openly parade in the streets and call for Israel's destruction. All of this occurs in plain sight, within the watchful eye of UNRWA teachers. These students are between the ages of 8 and 10 and have already received military training. Here they are, pictured with toy guns. But there's nothing childish about their message or actions.
A chilling scene of UNRWA students between the ages of 8 and 10 you heard in the streets carrying toy guns and openly calling for the destruction of Israel. UNRWA is the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinians in the Middle East and has been accused of funding a curriculum that radicalizes children and teaches them to wage jihad against Israel. Many of these truths are exposed in a brand new documentary produced by the Center for Near East Policy Research. David Bedein is the chief producer, of this mini documentary. He joins me now from Ottawa. Now, David, in the film you say that Gaza, the war in Gaza, may be on hold, but the indoctrination continues. Now, you've spent 27 years researching UNRWA. Why was it important for you to put out this new documentary?
What's very important to understand, and this is a classic man bites dog situation, that Hamas, as a terrorist organization, has taken over, in a sense, hijacked United Nations facilities. A United Nations school, which is supposed to teach peace, instead has inside the school, in all their schools, Hamas operatives organizing paramilitary training in the schools. Now, this is not something we put out in a book 3 years ago. We put out in many studies over the last 11 years. I've shared it with parliamentarians in Canada, in the US, in Europe. But to film it, it's seeing is believing. So that's the whole point here, that we have here in UNRWA. And as I was traveling to Canada, Hamas made a new declaration. 1,800 young people of this age group are being trained in one of the UNRWA camps in Gaza, right? To have military training and to get involved with the next conflict, and of course, to cause civilian casualties. We have a hijacking of a UN agency.
So if we know that this is happening, why does this organization, UNRWA, continue to receive $1.2 billion annually from 20 different countries, the vast majority of which coming from the United States?
Well, what's interesting is this. The U.S. gives a quarter of the funding. The EU gives a quarter of the funding. Canada gives something for education, but Canada has stopped funding the general fund. What has to be understood is this. UNRWA has excellent public relations. You go onto their website, you think you're dealing with Nirvana, with a peace organization. You wouldn't know from their website what they are funding. What they report to all the Western nations is that they're funding simply a relief agency for children and for adults who basically are suffering in refugee camps. No understanding of the fact that they're actually perpetuating them to stay in the camps. No understanding of the fact that there is military training in the schools. No understanding of the fact that they actually have a curriculum. Right. A curriculum based on conducting war. Now that's what's going on. It's counterintuitive. They have a massive public relations operation to convince people, to convince the donor nations that their purpose is for peace.
Yeah, and you know, I want to be clear to our viewers, Canada has completely divested from UNRWA's General Operations Fund, largely in response, presumably, to a number of these exposés that people like you have done. But, you know, what should happen? Because sadly, there are generations upon generations of Palestinians that are completely dependent on UNRWA. So do we just shut it down?
No, UNRWA can't be shut down. That's number one. UNRWA can only be shut down if the United Nations General Assembly makes a decision to do it. That's not going to happen. But there's 4 things that can be done by all the donor nations. And incidentally, Canada is the chair of something called the Refugee Working Group, established 24 years ago to oversee refugee issues in the peace process. So four simple things. 1, audit all funds coming into UNRWA. 2, introduce UNHCR criteria. That's the main agency that deals with refugees, and work on rehabilitation, resettlement, humanitarian needs of Palestinians, as opposed to telling them you have to stay in awful conditions, in misery, because of right of return. Number 3, cancel the curriculum. The United Nations does not have to use a war curriculum. There are Palestinians who have created peace curriculum. Use that. And number 4, and this is in accordance with Canadian law, American law, EU law, and United Nations law, dismiss all employees if they're members of Hamas. Those are 4 things.
No, I got to ask you, because Chris Gunness, who I'm sure you're quite familiar with, is a spokesperson for UNRWA. He says that that curriculum that's being implemented and taught in Gaza and in the West Bank is the same curriculum being taught in East Jerusalem. How would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, at least in Jerusalem, there is oversight from in Jerusalem, the schools in Jerusalem, the Arab schools in Jerusalem. There's oversight from the Israel Ministry of Education. Is it good? Is it perfect? No. And it should be improved. As a matter of fact, Chris Gunness does us a favor by telling everybody that there's also a problem that Israel has to deal with in the areas under its control in Jerusalem. And I would hope that Gunness and other people would cooperate with Israel and with all the donor countries to eliminate this kind of curriculum. The fact that Israel's making a mistake, should UNRWA also make that same mistake? That's the bottom line.
Now, you were in the House of Commons yesterday.
Correct.
I want to ask you very quickly about this. What was the reaction like speaking to parliamentarians?
The reaction of parliamentarians, and this is my 6th visit on the Canadian Capitol Hill. The reaction is one of shock, and basically people are aghast amongst Canada's elected officials. The fact that there can be such a curriculum in a time of a peace process, a continuing peace process, which is encouraging war, which is encouraging, not only encouraging war in terms of a general sense, but actually using the schools as training operatives. Now, our credibility on this issue was kind of improved during the summer when the rockets were discovered in the schools themselves. Well, those are the same schools that in our book that we put out in this past May about UNRWA being a roadblock to peace, we showed that in those same schools there's Hamas operatives which are running paramilitary operations, and the funding is coming from donor nations who think they're feeding people bullets, feeding people military training. Sorry, there's something wrong with that.
Right.
And the universal reception we've had wherever we go with this issue, and we intend to go to Canada, to a number of parliaments, and we hope that Canada will assert its role as the head of the RWG and maybe gather the donor nations together for a meeting on this subject. But it's horror. It's people are aghast. This is not what they hear through the mainstream media, because it doesn't fit the narrative, of people suffering in refugee camps who should be helped.
For our viewers, where can they find your documentary?
Well, it was released yesterday. It's on YouTube, but it's on our website. It'll be on our website tonight, IsraelBehindTheNews.com. You'll be able to see the documentary, also the other 6 documentaries that we've produced, including last year's documentary, which went very well, called Camp Jihad. Okay. And the UNRWA response to Camp Jihad was that we fabricated the whole thing. I don't know that I have a UNRWA summer camp in my backyard.
All right, Mr. Bedein, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.